My name is John. I work for a certain publishing company as a sidekick. I'm turning 40 this year and still haven't found a partner. That's not to say I've never dated, though. In college, I had one. We got together at a book group and started dating after realizing how much we both loved the same novelist. Since we worked close to one another after graduation, we continued to be close. We never got into arguments. Our bond was as strong as it had ever been. I used to believe that I wanted us to remain this close forever and perhaps even wed in the future. It seems that I wasn't the only one who thought that. Our meetings became less in number as she became closer to a senior colleague at her job. She ended our relationship by the time I was in my second year of work. Later on, a friend of mine revealed to me that she had fallen in love with a dashing executive at the ID firm where she worked, a man whose appearance and salary were far superior to mine. Men are ultimately chosen by women based on their appearance and financial status. I never got a girlfriend again after losing my self-confidence. I haven't even remotely expressed interest in ladies in my life. Nonetheless, I enjoyed the company of my coworkers and was really content with the connections I had at work. It has been more than 10 years since I left my prior work in my mid-20s and joined this company in the middle. It's easy for me to fill in for my less experienced colleagues when they make a mistake, even if I don't hold a prominent position. I used to occasionally go out for drinks after work and listen to my coworkers' grievances while giving them advice. They therefore truly depended on me. He then came up to me one day, the day after I had assisted in covering up an error for a coworker, and said, "We've got news. Have you heard? A young woman will be joining us from headquarters as a new employee." I put both of my hands lightly on my colleague's shoulders as he became giddy over a young woman and murmured, "Easy there, calm down." Shortly after he regained his breathing, our boss and the aforementioned young lady entered the office. "Starting today, Saren will be the manager of this division," she stated. "My name is Catherine. It's nice to meet you, everyone." The ovation grew louder when she nodded slightly and acknowledged them. As the applause continued, my subordinate colleague whispered to me, "I heard Catherine used to be a department head at headquarters." It struck me when I heard that. Impressive for someone so young. My employer later confirmed that the reports were accurate by telling me the same thing. Given her history of ascending to a supervisory role at such a young age, she put in even more effort than the gossip implied, completing assignments quickly and demonstrating her abilities. She became my superior despite being younger. She was amiable and incredibly skilled, fitting right in with our department right away. There was one thing, though, that bothered me. Frequently, I sensed her stare from her far-off desk. It was an inexplicable gaze rather than a flirty or contemptuous one. I'd initially assumed she was perplexed by me because I'm a middle-aged man who still plays a supporting role. She came to my desk one day, a few days into this, and asked if I could get something ready for her by the next afternoon. She was really capable, so I assumed she could complete it more quickly on her own. But after realizing the basic information she required, I chose to assist her because of her efficiency and the fact that I knew she must be overworked. I told her, "I can finish this today. When it's ready, I'll bring it over." She remained still as I returned my attention to my computer. She had a shocked expression on her face and her mouth was open when I looked up. I said, "What's wrong?" She appeared to awaken and utter, "Oh, nothing." "I'm grateful," she said, eventually returning to her desk. As agreed upon, I turned in the finished paper shortly before work ended that day. She glanced from the document to me and back again, seeming even more astonished than before. I steeled myself, fearing she would tell me I wasn't doing a good enough job. She finally managed to say, "Amazing," as her first word. She went on, "Who exactly are you?" Then, it seems that my presentation was so flawless and sophisticated that it surprised her. Observing the situation, a younger colleague was pretty intrigued and was ready to approach me when another colleague sensed the tension between us and took the younger colleague's hand, saying, "We'll be heading out now," and walked out of the office. I met her eyes after waving them off and said, "Just a sideline employee, really." However, as she looked up at me with a perplexed expression, she blurted out, "No offense, but this French document isn't something you can just translate. Even our headquarters staff finds it complicated, but you've put it together so well. It's astounding." I explained, "In actuality, I studied abroad for a year during college," while she kept looking at the paper and then at me in shock. I devoted all of my study time to learning French. During that period, interacting with native speakers helped me become even more proficient. She looked shocked, but her face didn't change when I explained. "I understand that you speak French. However, there is information outside of French in this document. It takes time for an average employee to translate non-French text. However, you completed it so swiftly. How many languages are you able to understand?" I only gave a brief response, about 5, stating the obvious. She appeared even more shocked at my quick answer, as though she had seen a ghost. She held her head in surprise and remarked, "I can't believe someone of your caliber isn't in a top position here or at the headquarters." It felt like a transgression to simply tell the truth and have that kind of response. There was an uncomfortable silence. She paused for a moment, then smiled at me, as though letting go of the stress. She then started to tell me the real reason she had asked for the document. "To tell the truth, your work ethic has amazed me since the day I started here. John, it wouldn't be shocking if you were making it at our headquarters, considering your age and the caliber of your job. I've always been curious about why. So that I could evaluate your skills, I had you work on this complicated document. John, from what I've heard, you quit your last job, came to work for this company in the middle, and have been working in a low-key capacity for more than 10 years. Do you not want to move up the corporate ladder in the future?" I wondered if my coworkers felt the same way about me when she told me that. However, I wasn't all that interested in things like fancy titles or promotions. She chuckled at this and replied, "You're an interesting guy." The jobs that were assigned to me were much harder after that day. She invited me to go with her to a meeting at the headquarters later on. I reluctantly accepted and made my way to the headquarters. I was a little anxious because it was my first trip to the corporate office since my mid-career interview. The topic of discussion at the meeting was an upcoming youth business book. I had assumed before the meeting began that I would simply attend and keep quiet. But once it started, I was unable to stop thinking about it. Before I knew it, I was making several suggestions, and the majority of the headquarters staff concurred, their expressions expressing surprise. I was called into the CEO's office following the meeting, as he was also in attendance. Catherine and I went. Catherine was correct, after all. "John, you're incredibly gifted. Talent like yours shouldn't be wasted. I would really like you to come work with our editing team at the main office and put all of your skills to use." Startled by this unexpected invitation, I uttered, "Me? Really?" I was interrupted by the CEO, who covered my hands with his own and whispered, "I'm counting on you." The CEO put so much effort into the handshake that I felt I couldn't let him down, even if I still wanted to decline. I vowed to myself that I would try my hardest, and then said, "Understood." Not long after, I was moved to the editorial division. Everyone was curious as to why Catherine, who was so capable, had been moved from headquarters to my former office. However, this time, I got the exact opposite reaction: skepticism and coldness. Is this elderly man currently being moved to the headquarters? All these time, wasn't he just your average office worker? Is he willing to participate? I heard similar remarks a lot when I initially transferred, but I didn't let it depress me. In order to satisfy Catherine and the CEO, I had to produce results here. I worked nonstop after that, oblivious to the looks and hushes. The effort was worthwhile. After a while, even the coworkers who had previously disregarded me started to acknowledge my contributions. In my former role, I had never had the sense of fulfillment that I have now in this setting. I've come to enjoy this place of work. One day, I was eating lunch at my desk at the office after acclimating to my new role. Catherine sent me an email while I was sitting at my desk eating lunch. Want to go out for drinks after work today? Upon reflection, I realized that I hadn't really spent much time with Catherine outside of work-related gatherings since I moved to the headquarters. I thought it would be appropriate to go as a way of showing thanks since I felt like I owed a lot for how far I'd gone. Catherine was already sipping her drink when I got to the assigned bar. When Catherine saw me, she waved her hand and displayed a carefree look she would never display at work. The CEO and a few coworkers have informed me, "John, it seems like you're doing fantastically." Actually, not really. I'm only now starting to get used to the work and atmosphere of the office. It's been hectic each day. Following their mutual update, she said, "May I ask you one question?" With a somewhat different, more serious expression than before, she asked. I merely nodded in answer, not saying anything. "John, you are so talented. Why were you put in such a backbench position?" I'm not a heavy drinker, so after just half a mug of beer, I was already tipsy. Perhaps as a result, I began telling a story to my coworkers that I had never told any of them before. On my resume that I submitted to this company, I listed a different university even though I actually graduated from Harvard. Although I was unable to see her face, I might assume that she was astonished in the same way that she had been when she quickly understood a difficult material. I ignored her response and carried on with my tale. When I started working for my former employer more than 10 years ago, I was a dynamo from the beginning. My goal was to become an elite member of the corporate ladder. Not only did I possess the drive, but I excelled beyond my peers' expectations. My coworkers shared my same level of drive for a while. Although each day was demanding and competitive, it felt satisfying. But eventually, I started to notice jealousy coming from my peers. They would remark things like, "Of course, he can do it," before I realized it. He graduated from Harvard, and I found myself accepting their work as though they were doing it to spite me. I'd eventually experienced depression as a result of the mental strain. Before I knew it, I had resigned from my position. Because of my Harvard education, I was held in such high regard and assumed to be capable of handling anything. I started to question whether it would be less stressful to act less capable. I lied on my resume and claimed to be a Harvard graduate for this reason. After telling her my story, I turned to face her. I was relieved that she seems more interested than I had anticipated. That seems difficult. Now, I sort of get it. To be honest, it was simple at first to act incompetent and marginalize employees at this organization. But I could have coasted till retirement without ever feeling this fulfilled if I hadn't met you. When I moved to our headquarters, I didn't feel at home at first, but now I truly appreciate my coworkers and the atmosphere. I am very grateful to you, Catherine. I'm really grateful to you. Being able to show my thanks was one of the main reasons I came here today, and it felt good to do so. She appeared a little shy and remarked, "Oh, please, I didn't do much." Her expression suggested that she was grateful for the praise. We spoke for a little while more until she abruptly realized, "Oh, right. I should have invited you here today because I want you to meet someone. John." It appears that this person is a professor and, like myself, a graduate of Harvard. He is a well-known professor in the publishing industry. Therefore, I've heard that his books will undoubtedly become bestsellers. He can be a little tough and unyielding, but if it's you, perhaps he'll listen. Catherine and I went to see the professor a few days later. Catherine opened the door and said, "Hello." "You again." The professor, who was sitting and deeply immersed in a newspaper, asked with a frustrated grimace. "Today, I'd like to introduce someone," Catherine stated. She prodded me forward with a forceful push from behind. "Hello, I'm John from Tay Publishing. Please meet me." John attended Harvard, but he put another college on his resume and he was fired from his work until recently for disclosing my background. It caused me to immediately bend my head in shock and humiliation. The professor's response, though, was unexpected. "Isn't that interesting now?" he said, bursting into a happy giggle. "Well, let's hear your side of the story, at least. Did you come to talk about publishing?" Catherine had warned me about his difficult and stubborn personality, so I was on the lookout. But now that the ice had melted, I felt relieved. At the professor's suggestion, Catherine and I sat down across the table from him. I was worried that he would delve into technical subjects that I would not be able to address. But our chat stayed informal. We lost track of time as we talked about me, about Catherine, and briefly about the publishing business. The professor had clearly been more receptive to me. "Dude, John, you're not just smart, you're entertaining. I would think about publishing with your agency if you were the chief editor," the professor remarked. "Really?" "Yes, but the goal here is a bestseller if we're doing this right. Please put your best effort forward. I don't want to sacrifice the content. I'm depending on you, John." I'd gained his favor with that. As Catherine had planned, we were able to talk about publishing. "John, we succeeded. Even that unyielding professor was touched by your persuasiveness," I remarked modestly. "It wasn't just me." I said, "I didn't do anything, but I felt happy inside like never before. It was unbelievable to me that I would get to collaborate with someone as prestigious as the professor. Just thinking about it made me eager for every day. The professor and I wrote a business book for young adults, and it was a huge hit. I worked even harder since I was sure that with the professor, we might create future masterpieces. It was never a pointless endeavor. The books that I and the professor published continued to make the bestseller list, and I was much more visible in the editing department than I had been in the past. And I don't just mean that it had become more well-known. It's impossible for me to compare the sense of fulfillment I had to my prior employment or to the days when I was simply another face in the crowd. Later on, Catherine and I moved from being coworkers to a romantic connection. We recently got married and were blessed with a stunning daughter. Before I met Catherine and the professor, my life was just coasting through typical days till retirement. After that, things changed dramatically. Because of my excellence, I detested my job and once handed up the title of Harvard graduate, something I had worked so hard to obtain. But it was interactions with people that could be considered fate that allowed me to change. I was merely fortunate to come across something important. However, I want to encourage anyone who wants to improve their current circumstances to not be afraid of change. Do something. If you wait for an opportunity, you might not discover it in your lifetime, or you might only get it when you are 40. Well, it's always better to seize opportunities early. 40 isn't too late. You can live longer and more meaningful days if you take advantage of opportunities as they arise. I would want to pose this question to individuals who are happy with their current situation. Is that really the best you can do? I can't deny that the professor has helped me establish a reputation as an editor with a track record of blockbusters. However, I've given my all to my work day and nights since the professor informed me he liked it. I'm glad to state that because I put my all into every book, even with their little success, my modest amount of hard work has undoubtedly helped those bestsellers. So stop and think for a moment. If you believe that you are not at your limit and that your current circumstances are indeed the result of giving it your all, then I implore you to take immediate action. Work is always rewarded in some fashion. If a few interactions can significantly alter my life, even after fabricating my education to become a sidelined employee, then yours can too.